Hello, my name is Megan Berrickman, and I'm going to be giving a presentation over Cai Guo-Qiang. And this presentation was created by Talu, Shair, Miranda, me, and Caitlin. So Cai Guo-Qiang is a contemporary Chinese artist who is famous for incorporating gunpowder and controlled explosives into his artworks. He was born in 1957 in Quanzhou City, China, and he currently resides in New York City. As the son of a calligrapher and a traditional painter who worked in a bookstore, Cai was exposed to Western literature and ancient Chinese arts at a very young age. Cai studied at the Shanghai Drama Institute, where he received a BFA in stage design. He resided in Japan from 1986 to 1995. Cai Guo-Qiang began experimenting with gunpowder in 1984, and while living in Japan, he explored the properties of gunpowder in his paintings. This led to his first public staged explosion event in 1989, which then became an important step in his practice. It is stated that the relationship between the ephemeral and the immortal, of connecting heaven to earth, is a key theme for the artist through the use of this gunpowder in his works. His unique position and understanding of Eastern culture blend together to create a larger understanding of the shared human experiences with emphasis on cultural history. Cai's use of gunpowder in his work helps foster spontaneity and create commentaries that confront the artistic and social climate in China, and it also helps to recast the quintessential Chinese material to stake his contribution in the emerging global art scene. Cai is internationally renowned for his creative works across different mediums such as installations, videos, performance art, and works on paper, most of which incorporate gunpowder in some sense. Cai Guo-Qiang has also received a numerous amount of awards, and his works have been included in some group exhibitions as well as solo exhibitions. So the piece we decided to focus on is called Self-Portrait, a Subjugated Soul. We picked this piece because of the intense Eastern cultural commentary that is portrayed with the gunpowder that Cai uses, and the deeper emotional portrayal of life in this piece, which draws the viewer in and makes them contemplate their own potentially subjugated soul. In this piece, I think that Cai was trying to convey the intensity of the human experience and the relation of a soul to the rest of the surrounding world, while drawing on historical context and also creating a larger commentary through the tension that's portrayed in this piece. So the initial reaction to the piece shows an abstract human figure, and it almost looks like this is a dark soul, but the figure does not have clear outlines. The portrait has an emotional depth to it. It's not an ordinary self-portrait by any means. It shows emotions through the layers of gunpowder residue, and it looks like the soul is either leaving the darkness behind or it's immersed in it. The cloud of darkness might also stand for a confused, conflicted state of mind. It makes me feel lonely and kind of sad because I think that's how the soul that's being portrayed feels. The figure is in monochromatic shades of black, naturally bringing up a gloomy feeling. This makes me think that the artist in the piece is somehow troubled. He is internally conflicted and carries around the burden of this troubling feeling. The cloud around the figure almost looks like the burden that he's carrying. The cloud could also represent the negative energy that he feels, or because of the streaks coming off of it, it could also represent the way that we're connected and our souls are projecting out into the rest of the world. It reminds me a lot also of the Hiroshima shadows that were produced after the atomic bomb was dropped in Japan. In a self-portrait, a subjugated soul, there is one solitary figure. The figure is dark and surrounded by gray and tan, while the background is white. And it appears that the figure is shrouded in darkness, or that darkness radiates from the figure. The area closest to the figure is dark, but the colors lighten further away from the figure. There are no discernible facial features on the figure or any identifiable markings, which could mean that this piece relates to a wide variety of viewers. There are black streaks radiating around the figure, and this creates a mood of electricity and violent connectivity. This could relate to the tension that we feel when we're trying to relate to the rest of the world and connect to other people. And the fact that there are no other things in the photo with him representative of the tension because there's nothing else to connect to. The work is made with gunpowder and oil on canvas. The black streaks in the area around the figure appear to be the result of exploding gunpowder. From the artist's physical point of view, the figure appears to be standing still. The focal point of the work is the figure itself. and the black streaks coming off of it. The viewer is drawn to look there because it is the negative space in the work, and it's also very ambiguous, causing the viewer to be captivated by it while they try to discern what's being depicted and why. Before learning about the social and historical context, it appears that the piece represents loneliness. The figure itself presents a mood of loneliness and isolation while simultaneously portraying a violent, jarring sense of existence. Since the piece is called Self-Portrait, a Subjugated Soul, Cai Guo-Qiang could feel like his life is being controlled somehow. But the wildness of the explosion of the gunpowder conflicts with this sense of control. The darkness and haziness of the figure gives a feeling of confusion or conflict. In the presence of this piece, the viewer is made to feel confused or understand some kind of deeper existential conflict in themselves about what life is and how we exist in the world and how we connect to the world around us. We are meant to feel this way due to the way the work is created with an explosive, confrontational material that is rooted in cultural significance and meaning. The end result is ambiguous, and a sense of being and connectivity to the world exudes from the figure. This work is expressionist, as it is more representative and emotional rather than literal, while still focusing greatly on cultural context. The piece feels tempestuous and powerful, while simultaneously creating an ambiguous and uncertain isolative mood. Through this tension, Cai is commenting on the existence of the soul and the way that we interact with our surroundings, while at the same time feeling incredibly isolated and alone. In A Self-Portrait, a Subjugated Soul, Cai Guo-Qiang ignites gunpowder directly on a canvas. The Chinese discovered gunpowder while they were looking for a medicine that would make them feel immortal. Because it exploded, they called it fire medicine. Over time, they used it in celebrations, so fireworks have often been used in Chinese culture, and in his hometown of Guangzhou, fireworks were also used to deliver various messages in daily life. When making his art, he thought of gunpowder. To him, gunpowder destroys your creation, blowing up everything you've been taught and turning art on its head. He said that gunpowder sets him free because he would have to give control to the gunpowder itself instead of using his eyes and hands. A Subjugated Soul was created in 1989 while Cai Guo-Qiang was living in Japan. He had worked on the painting in 1985 while living in China. However, he did not feel he could show the work in public because of the political environment at the time. The Cultural Revolution in China began when Cai was 9 years old in 1966 and ended in 1976. Mao Zedong, China's communist leader, started the Cultural Revolution to assert his control. He called on young people to take away control from the current government leaders. The young people formed groups called the Red Guard. Everything that was old or connected to traditional culture was smashed or removed, and wealthy people were cast out. It was a brutal period of China's history. The Cultural Revolution affected Cai because his father spent all their money on books, and later they had to burn most of them during the revolution. Even though the Cultural Revolution lasted 10 years, it still had lasting effects on China and Cai's life. The Tiananmen Square massacre in 1989 also had an effect on Cai. He reworked A Self-Portrait, a Subjugated Soul after these events. He added the shadows around a figure and added a subjugated soul to the title of the work. The Tiananmen Square protests were led by students who called for democracy and free speech. The protests became bloody when the Chinese government tried to stop the protests, and many people died. Cai moved to Japan in 1986, and the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were subjects in some of his pieces. For example, in 1996, he completed a project called The Century with Mushroom Clouds. At the end of World War II, the United States dropped atomic bombs on 2 Japanese cities. Tens of thousands of people were killed, and others were poisoned by the radiation. This was the first time weapons of this scale were used. These events would have a lasting impact on Japan and the world for a very long time. The bomb left Hiroshima shadows, which were black shadows of people and objects that were standing in the path of the bomb, and these shadows were caused by the heat that the bomb produced. The heat actually bleached surfaces, leaving behind dark shadows where people and objects blocked the heat wave from bleaching the walls. The figure, A Self-Portrait, a Subjugated Soul, looks similar to the Hiroshima shadows. So based on all of this historical and social context, Cai made Self-Portrait, a Subjugated Soul when he was living in China, and then reworked it when he was living in Japan after the Tiananmen Square riots. When he first made the piece, he didn't feel free to talk about the art and express the art in the way he wanted to, for fear of repercussions from the Chinese government. The title of the piece also points to the meaning. Subjugate means to control, and soul could mean artistic energy or creativity. Therefore, Zai felt that his creativity was being controlled by the Chinese government. The piece showcases his tumultuous feelings about leaving China. He left China so that he could create art and not be considered unpatriotic, and he was unable to find this freedom in Japan. However, he left his home country, and this caused feelings of sadness and loneliness. Because the figure is solitary, this piece could represent those conflicting feelings within himself. He reworked the piece after the Tiananmen Square riots in 1989. The riots made Zai feel sorrowful and wish that his country could change. Overall, this piece is very personal and expresses the emotions Zai felt at a time of his life when he moved away from China. Because the atomic bombs have also influenced some of his later work, it can be assumed that the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the destruction and devastation in modern warfare was very present in his mind. He moved to Japan in 1986, so it's possible that his piece was inspired by the atomic bombs. The figure in the piece looks similar to the Hiroshima shadows. While living in Japan, Zai perfected his technique of using gunpowder on canvas. He probably equated the destruction of gunpowder to violence, and the violence of this also relates to the explosions in Tiananmen Square and the atomic bombs. Whether or not this piece was influenced by atomic bombs or modern warfare, the work expresses Zai's personal emotions of loneliness and isolation and feelings of violent repression before and after he moved to Japan. The work can be seen as expressionistic in the way that it shows a self-portrait of Zai and allows the viewer to experience the same emotions that Zai had while he was creating it. Rather than making a more traditional self-portrait, Zai chose to make one that reflected his feelings towards very specific events that occurred in his life. It serves as a way for Zai to express his inner thoughts and show how they have influenced him both as an artist and as a man, and simultaneously is successful in eliciting these feelings in others when viewing self-portrait A Subjugated Soul. By having such isolated figures surrounded by darkness and using the effects of gunpowder to represent the violence of the events that influenced him, Zai is successfully conveying his emotions through the portrait, even without including other aspects like a figure's facial feature. For these same reasons, the work could also be considered pragmatist. Zai's self-portrait serves the purpose of portraying himself while also expressing his reaction to the shooting in Tiananmen Square and his alienation and disconnection from China. The portrait was not intended to be a passive objective trail of himself. Zai wanted it to be filled with emotion, and the use of symbolic elements such as gunpowder helped to make the portrait successful. He's also successful in inspiring people to react and to question the events that were occurring in China at the time, as this is what inspired the darkness in Zai's self-portrait, and they were clearly reflected in his work. Because Zai uses the portrait to show his perspective in Tiananmen Square shooting, the work can also be evaluated using the postmodern/critical theories. Zai was living in Japan when the shooting occurred, so his reaction was likely different than it would have been if he still lived in China. His reality during this time was therefore very relative to his surroundings, and he altered self-portrait A Subjugated Soul to reflect his personal experience. The portrait shows the isolation Zai was feeling as he witnessed the events in his native country from afar in Japan, making him even more successful in showing his individual perspective through his artwork. Here are the references that we have used throughout this presentation. I hope you enjoyed listening and learning about Cai Guo-Qiang.